I can't help but walk away from this movie and just feel like it's an absolute insult to mental health and anxiety specifically. Very quickly, if you are new here, I like to cover off those movies that get a little bit less talked about and less reviewed, and just try and find a hidden gem for myself and recommend onto you guys. This time we are covering Neon Lights. Now this is a messy one, so I'll try and get through it as cleanly as possible. Here we are following Clay. Now he's the CEO of a tech company with very serious anxiety. Now this is like the extreme end of anxiety though, and I'm not doubting that people like this do exist, it is a very real thing. However, to make the movie as dramatic as possible, they've taken it to like the extreme lengths of anxiety here, and it just becomes a little bit too much in a lot of scenes. You know, the way he walks, the way he stands, and he's self-comforting a lot, and that voice that he speaks in, he's got this kind of calming, raspy voice. You know, he's almost whispering all of his lines here because he's clearly a little bit nervous and a little bit unsure. Like, listen to this.
Thank you, for a lovely evening. Good night.
That's throughout the whole movie. With his declining mental health, he goes on a talk show about his tech company, which does not go well for him. So following this, he needs to take a break and kind of focus on himself. So he uses this opportunity to put together a family reunion in his house in the middle of nowhere. That was a really good idea because nothing's going to go wrong. So, we're introduced to the family. We've got Clay as the main lead here. We've got his two brothers, we've got James and Benny. And Benny's got his wife coming along, Claire, and their daughter, Blair. They've done that, like, name mashup thing, it feels. Like, fan fictions do it. Don't know why this movie decided to do it. It's not cute. It just feels like they've not thought about it and it was a last-minute decision. It was very clear that he has gone through something very traumatic, which has led into his mental health the way it is. And I fully respect that. Now, picking up a movie and focusing on anxiety in it, not a bad idea. But when it's executed like this, it doesn't paint it in the best light. So his two brothers, let's just get this out of the way, they're assholes. They are just the worst guys. James seems to always come up with business ideas based on the conversations, but he doesn't have the intelligence or money to execute them, so he relies on Clay for this. Whereas Benny just resents Clay, and that is very interesting, and that does get explored. Not as much as I would have liked to have seen, but at least touch on it and understand a bit more around this. Because it's very clear that Clay's done well for himself. You know, he's got this house, he's the CEO of a tech company, whereas Benny's just resentful. Not of just where he's at now, but how he got there. The wife Claire, she's the only one that really seems to make an effort and try and keep the peace going, but you don't really feel like it's necessarily always in Clay's favour. Like she's just trying to maintain both her husband and Clay, just so that the weekend has a nice atmosphere. You know, she's playing sides, but of course she leans towards her husband at the end of the day. And the daughter Blair, she's a bookworm. She's more similar to Clay than she is her own dad here, and so that again feeds into the resentment side of it. It's a good angle, and I wish they'd done a bit more with it. And the last person I've not mentioned yet, and the clear standout here, is Kim Coates. He plays Denver. He's a very mysterious figure that's clearly playing on Clay's mind a lot. It's also like his inner voice as well, just telling him a lot of things about being a man and reciting various things that probably came from his childhood. Now, as you can probably expect, whilst they're all here, things start to go a little bit awry. Some of the family start going missing, and this is where the movie just begins spiralling out of control, which is fitting because Clay also starts spiralling out at the same time. You can kind of see what they've done there. It's okay. And whilst he is spiralling out of control and his anxiety's getting more of him, we cut between, you know, therapy sessions of him in the house, and this Denver character that just keeps creeping in. And then as the movie progresses, we start seeing that these three elements are just blending together and bleeding into each other way more than they should be. It's very clear that they want to make this movie from the perspective of anxiety. You know, in The Father, which is fantastic if you've not watched it yet. Why? That whole story is around dementia and the impacts of it, and that's told from the perspective of somebody with dementia. You know, the movie doesn't quite make sense, but that's a stylistic choice, and it makes sense into the bigger story. Whereas here, they just want to fuck with you so much because he's got anxiety, so it leaves you as an audience member not knowing what's going on, feeling very uncomfortable, and it doesn't make sense. Oh, and why is it called Neon Lights? Some of the bedrooms have neon lights, and, you know, he's a bit eccentric. Metaphor. There's no way I can really go through this movie beat by beat, because it'll just spoil everything in it. But what I will say is it's very clear that once we hit that midway point, we do get quite an interesting twist, and then at that midway point, the movie's just rushing to get to the big finale and the big reveals. And I'll be honest, those reveals come in at the very end. Like, the very end of the movie. Everything's not explained and then we've got a few minutes to breathe. No, you have time to think about this when the credits are rolling, and no time sooner. But his anxiety is just... it gets too much. He's clearly struggling with the family dynamics, but then as it's going on, he starts to get a little bit more confident, but it feels like that kind of false confidence, and ultimately it just becomes very scary. You know, he's doing the kind of fake evil laugh. It's kind of a Jokerish kind of thing going.
I am a man.
And it's weird because throughout the movie, you don't like him. To begin with, you do feel for him when his brothers are just total dicks. But then as it's going on and he starts becoming less anxious and trying to be more controlling, you don't like Clay. Whilst you watch the movie, you'll like him less and less. Once you make sense of the film and everything comes together, you realise he's not so bad. And that's what I mean by it doesn't seem to do well for mental health, because it's really painting person with anxiety here as the villain because of their anxiety. What is this walk? Like, we just talk about that. Like, we get it. It's very clear that he's got anxiety. We just need a couple of scenes with it. It doesn't need to be so thick in every scene. Honestly, there's one moment with Blair that was really good, and it was the standout scene, which says a lot when it's just two people talking on some steps. Why is the audio so loud for it? Like, listen to this.
Take them to after-school programs, events, and teach them things. Mine are just...
I've not edited that. The music just stands out as being a little bit too loud when they're having quite a heartfelt moment about how they're both bookworms and they're both very similar. And then whoever it was just turned the audio up to 11 and then just fucked the scene. So like, what would I be saying about Neon Lights? If you've got nothing else to watch and you want a movie that's going to keep you guessing till the very end, put on Neon Lights. It's centred on a character that you kind of will like and dislike as the movie goes on. The other characters are quite cliche and quite dull. The movie doesn't look good. Like, it doesn't look bad, but nothing about it looks good other than the neon lights, which then just makes you feel like that's the reason they're in the movie, was just to add a little bit of style to it. Without them, you've got one of the dullest looking films ever here. Just people cutting about the mansion. It's very difficult to follow, but that's intentional. And it does all make sense in the end. But as I said, the standout was Kim Coates. I wish I'd seen more of him as Denver here. His part in the movie and the role he played made perfect sense by the end, and they could have done a little bit more with him, a little bit more with the childhood between these brothers and why there was resentment there. What we got was just another group of people go to a house in the middle of the woods, and one by one they start going missing. It's not until the very end that we get the twist that we realise it was something different to what you've seen before, but you can't help but think for the hour and a half you're watching the movie, it is the same as every other movie you've seen. Now look, have you seen Neon Lights? What did you think of it? And if you are new and you enjoy what I do here, please do hit subscribe. It really does help out the channel. And thank you so much for watching.